much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I do love the winter shelter, so I always love a chance to talk about it. So my role at the moment has been to look after an organisation that's just been formed, really, called Whitehorse Churches Care. So the churches of Whitehorse have said, let's do something novel and work together and work across denominations and see what we can do to serve the community. And one of their first ideas was to run a winter shelter. So out in the Yarra Valley, you may have seen some publicity last year around it. A group called Stable One ran a winter shelter for the first time in 2017. So they opened up their church buildings to effectively house people for the 13 weeks of winter. 7 different churches. And so that happened over the last 3 years. And then they've been sharing their knowledge with people around Victoria and now also around Australia who've also wanted to get a shelter up and running. So this year there were scheduled to be shelters in Toowoomba and Lismore, and then down on the Mornington Peninsula, and then across Victoria, so Shepparton, Wangaratta, Bendigo, all sorts of different places, and then obviously Yarra Valley, Maroondah and Whitehorse. But yeah, COVID's put a bit of a halt to those plans, partly because the way the whole project runs is that we involve 200 volunteers. So already you've got just a large number of people, making it not particularly safe. And then we sleep in church buildings, so people don't have individual rooms or anything. They're all just in one big area. So there's a number of challenges this year, and we have decided that probably certainly the shelter can't run as we'd planned, and wondering what we can do instead. So I'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but I will talk about the winter shelter and how it all works, because I think it's still a good concept, even if it's not a great concept in the midst of a virus like this. So what happens is 7 churches put up their hands to host for 1 night a week each over the winter. So for example, in Whitehorse, what we'd planned was on Sunday night, we would be at Stairway Church. On Thursday nights, we'd be at New Hope Baptist. On Wednesday night, we'd be at the Salvos. On Friday nights, we'd be at St. Francis Xavier. And each night of the week, we're at a different church. And then what we do is we take up to 10 guests. So male and female can come, and they go through an assessment process if they want to actually stay with us. So we're looking for things like relatively stable mental health, because we've got 200 volunteers manning the project and we need to make sure everyone's safe. So relatively stable mental health. Many of our guests will come to us with an addiction issue, as you would perhaps expect. And so for them, what we ask is that they are able to abstain for the 12 hours that they're staying at the shelter, and that they're able to come sober. And so what we do is, we ask them a series of questions around that, get to know them, and then decide whether they're a good match or not for the shelter. We also ask them a little bit about if there's been any criminal history, what led them into homelessness, try and get a bit of background. We also ask them what they're good at, what they enjoy, and try and build on those strengths while they're with us. So we might, if someone tells me that they enjoy playing guitar, for example, we'll try and put a guitar on the trailer so that the next night they've got something that they enjoy. We had one year we had a pianist, which was amazing, and so we were serenaded most dinners because there were pianos at most of the churches, as you can imagine. So we have this opportunity to kind of get to know the guests on a really quite a deep level, really quite quickly, and get to know what they enjoy and try and build into those strengths. So we have our 10 guests, and then we have volunteers. So 200 volunteers that come from various churches and also from the community. So a whole mix of people who want to serve and share in the lives of these guests. And it's a great opportunity even just to get to know a whole lot of different people. I've been involved since 2017, so out in the Yarra Valley. I've been involved there since the start. And probably one of the highlights for me has actually been all the volunteers that I've gotten to know, and all the friendships that have been built as a result of working together. And every night that you're on shift or breakfast shift, you know, you meet someone different and get to know them. So it's good fun in that sense. In terms of what happens each day, so our guests are assessed as suitable. If they're assessed as suitable, they can come. We have a bus that will pick them up from different locations around, in this case it would be around Whitehorse, so for example probably near Box Hill Station somewhere, and then Blackburn Station. And then we drive them to the location where they're going to spend the night. Once they get there, there's a team of volunteers who will have received the trailer. So we have a trailer that goes from place to place with everyone's stuff in it. So we have stretcher beds. I actually have one of them in my lounge room here at the moment because I was measuring it up. But we've got stretcher beds, bags of doonas, pillows, linen, everything like that on this trailer, as well as board games, toiletries, a guitar, a whole lot of random things on the trailer that go from place to place. So the volunteers, there's usually about 4 or 5 volunteers at the church who will start unpacking the trailer, and then the guests arrive and we help them set up their beds, decide which corner of the room they want to be in. Churches that have lots of PowerPoints, you can imagine, are very popular, so that they can put a bed next to a PowerPoint and charge their phone overnight. And then we all sit down for a meal together. So we have a couple of cooks rostered on each night to share a meal, and we tend to, some of the cooks, you can imagine, go out of their way to make it a really special time for the guests. So for example, we had Christmas in July last year, and the cooks had gone to we had everything that you would expect to have at Christmas, complete with bonbons on the table and presents for the guests, the whole works. And you can imagine some of the guests. We had one woman who said, you know, I haven't had Christmas for, you know, many years. And she said to us through tears how special it was to just have that sense of having Christmas together. We've had Indian feasts. We've had all sorts of things as people put together themes and make the night special. And then after dinner, we gather together and play games. Often the guests go to bed relatively early, but often there's games going. We might put a movie on, or the footy, and generally just spend some time socialising. And then at 10 o'clock, we have another shift come on. So we have an overnight shift of 3 people, and 2 of them stay awake all night to make sure that the place is safe. So the overnight shifts are my least popular, but they're the most important. And so we won't run if we don't have the 3 overnight. And then in the morning, our brekkie shift turn up at 7 a.m. and they wake everyone up and offer people breakfast before they head off for the day. We found after our first year that obviously it's difficult for our guests during the day to have, you know, to know where to go. How do you stay warm? And especially out in the Yarra Valley, because it's not like there's a whole lot of shopping centres around or anything like that they can just go and pop themselves into for the day. And so what we ended up doing in our second and third year was that another church offered their building as a day centre. So we also had this opportunity to work really closely with our guests towards something better, but also a space for them to relax during the day. So we had couches and table tennis tables and lockers so they could store their things, kitchen facilities and food so they could make themselves something to eat as well. But it gave us a really good opportunity to work with them towards something better, because obviously services were open at that time. So we could help them make phone calls, or we had the local housing service would come out every Friday and have appointments with our guests. We had legal services come. The police popped in and helped. We had a guest one year who had a lot of issues with intervention orders and wasn't quite sure what he could and couldn't do. And you can imagine didn't have the greatest relationship with the police either. But we were able to bring the police in, and they had a great conversation with him, restored his faith in the policing system, and enabled him actually to see his baby daughter who had just been born. So those are some really positive times. We've had the chiropractor come out. We've had flu injections for everyone. All those sorts of things have been able to happen with the day centre. And we've seen some really good stories of guests being able to move into something better. So in 2018, we had 26 guests came through over this over the winter period. So although we only take 10 a night, some will stay a night or two and others will stay 13 weeks, which is probably too long, to be perfectly honest. Our ideal would be 3 to 5 weeks, so you've got time to work with them towards something better, but they're not becoming so dependent on you that they're sort of too comfortable, that come the end of winter, it's tricky to move them on. But we had 26 stay with us over winter in 2018, and 20 of them moved into something better while they were with us, which is a pretty good outcome. A lot of them went into, or some of them went into share houses. So when you've got a team of 200 volunteers, all of a sudden you've got these networks. And so people have been able to get, move into share houses. Someone's got a granny flat. And, after we've spent a few weeks with someone living at the shelter, you're able to make a bit more of an assessment about whether they'd be a good candidate for someone's granny flat. And often we'd have people come up for the meals who had a granny flat, just to get to know the guests before they actually offered them somewhere to stay, just to make sure that everyone was safe and comfortable with that situation. So we've had a number move into share houses, granny flats. Some we've been able to move into rehab if that's something that they've needed. Where else have they gone? There's a boarding house in Hawthorne called Servants Housing, which is a good rooming house, live-in managers, and quite a safe space. So we've had a number of our guests have been able to move into that. So you get, others have moved into proper transitional housing or offers of housing. So you get these opportunities to work with the guests. We've had a number of them that we still keep in touch with. So from the first year, we had a couple of guests that now live in regional Victoria, and they've had some of our volunteers come and stay with them at their house, which is just a real nice turnaround. We had another, a guest by the name of James, and I'll tell you his story. It's actually on the Stable One website. So if you look up stable1.org, he tells his story. But James was one of our first guests. And when he came to us, he'd been living in his car. So his marriage had broken up, and he'd been in his car for about a year and trying to maintain work. But obviously it's hard to go to work when you're living in your car. And on the days that he wasn't at work, he'd be trying to find accommodation or manage. And eventually his boss realized what was happening and helped him make some phone calls, and he came to us. And when he came to us, he was on a lot of medication, and obviously, he was recently unemployed. And through his time with us, he was probably with us for about 7 or 8 weeks. And through that time, he got a job. So again, when you've got 200 volunteers, you've all of a sudden got a network, and someone knew someone who needed a labourer. And so he went and worked for him. And in fact, he's worked ever since. So that was 2017, and he's been in full-time employment since he was at the shelter. And then another volunteer offered for him to go and stay at his place, and he's been there ever since as well. And now reunited with his kids, who are also living there. And yeah, just a really positive story, and off his medication as well, or a fair bit of it, and on a much more manageable dose for him. So he's doing really, really well 3-4 years on. He actually came back as a volunteer the following year, which is just really special to be able to share that with him, and also to have his insight. He came on our steering committee, which provided a lot of information that we weren't aware of. As you can imagine, you're not always aware of all the things that are going on behind the scenes, and he was able to give us a few tips and tricks as well, which we were able to incorporate into the program going forward. So that's James's story. We had another young woman with us last year who had a number of mental health issues, and when she came to us, so my background's social work, I picked up pretty quickly that something wasn't right, but it was hard to work out what exactly it was. And so over the following sort of 3 weeks, she came in and out. So some nights she'd stay with us, sometimes she'd just disappear, and you'd have no idea where she was, and she was uncontactable. And then she'd turn back up again, or she'd turn up at a community meal in some other area, and they would ring us and say, "Oh, she's here, can we bring her over?" And she'd come and stay with us for a few nights again. And her mental health deteriorated over the time she was with us, to the point that we had enough, we had enough evidence to call the CAT team and get a response, which was good. And so she was then admitted to hospital for 2 weeks, over which time she improved dramatically. And they then called us as an exit plan for her. So because she was homeless, where do they discharge her to? And we actually get that quite a lot. We get a number of people coming to us from hospital. And so she came to us and back to us for about 10 days. And in that time, the mental health team managed to find her some supported accommodation, and she was able to move into that. And so for the first time in about 2 years, she was in somewhere that she could call her own to a point, and that was safe for her. So you get this opportunity, I guess, to journey with people in a really unique way that often the services don't get to do, because they, you know, you see someone for an appointment and then they leave, and then you don't get to follow them up in the same way that you do when you're almost living with them and seeing them. We had another guest who came to us. So we've had some dogs as well. So you can imagine that people experiencing homelessness, many of them have a pet, and that's actually quite a limitation in terms of getting longer term housing or getting crisis accommodation. And so we've had a few dogs. The first year we had a couple of little dogs. So they were almost our first guests, I think, second lot maybe. And we hadn't really planned for dogs. We'd thought about dogs, but quickly we wrote a dog policy, and someone lent us a dog cage, and next minute we had 2 little happy dogs in the churches as well. But last year we had 3 dogs over the course of the winter, so all at different times, or at least some of them lived in cars, so that we didn't have 3 dogs in the churches all at once. We didn't need everyone barking at each other. But we had this guy come to us who had some mental health issues and had this dog. That's what made me think about the dog. And so he came and stayed. To be honest, the first probably week, it was all too overwhelming for him. And so he would come perhaps for, he might come for a meal, or he might come in and get a shower and then leave for the night. And gradually the time that he spent with us increased to the point that he was able to stay all through the night, and stayed for a number of weeks. And then during that time, was able to reconnect with his family and go back to live with one of his parents. And it's been really encouraging to hear from his parents, actually, to hear from his mum about the impact that the shelter had on his mental health, and the way that she saw him improve while, you know, over the period that he was with us, and then able to then reside with her again. So you get some really good news stories. Obviously, some people, it's a really big change to go from homelessness, especially long-term homelessness, to then move into something more stable. So that can be difficult for many people. And some of them come in and out of homelessness and continue to do so. But we do get to maintain contact with them, which means that over the years we can continue to support them in various ways and help them move to something better eventually, if that's what they want. However, what are we going to do in 2020? So we are, obviously that's put a big spanner in the works. We are wondering about other options. So at the moment, some of the churches are working together just to do things like food banks and relief centres in that sense, and talking to the council about other ways we could potentially provide support. Out in the Yarra Valley, they've been able to get their hands on a conference centre, and so they're hoping that will be something they can use, so the managers can live in. They won't need the number of volunteers to make it happen, and it will be individual rooms. So that's something that's happening out there, and I've wondered whether you might know of hotels or centres around the Whitehorse area that are empty. That would be an option. Whether we manage to, pay a certain amount to be able to use something like that. That's one of the ideas. Another idea has been caravans on a church property. So some of the churches in Whitehorse have a lot of land, and you could put some caravans around. So there's a few ideas like that, but it's hard to see how they would work at the moment. So I'm very open to ideas. If you have an idea, please send it through to me. I would love to hear from you and try and work through what we can do, because obviously the issue of homelessness isn't going to go away, and in fact it will probably increase over the winter. So and certainly with the effects of COVID-19, we could see increase in homelessness over the next few years. So that's where we're at. But yes, definitely keen to hear from you if you've got ideas, and if you want to hear some more of James's story, check out the Stable One website or the White Horse Church's Care website.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much, Kerryn. I think it's, I won't step on Shane's toes here, I'm sure, but I mean, it's obvious churches fulfill many roles in communities. And when you think of all the different facilities around, they've got space, they've got kitchens, they've got capacity to mobilize volunteers with networks, obviously. So that's quite a heartwarming story of pathways through and out of homelessness. So thank you very much for that. Just see if anyone has any questions, and I'll see if Ashley can help me with that, and or suggestions. We may wish to funnel suggestions through one of us. I don't know how, Gay, if you have a perspective on that, or Mark, if there are people
if they go to participants, and you'll get a list of everyone. It's at the bottom of your screen, and then there's a function for raise your hand or raise hand. So if you have a question, if you go and click on that, and then you can, as if people raise their hand, it will show against that list.
Yep. And I was thinking too, if there were people who are members of the club who are thinking of ideas to contribute to Kerryn's efforts, they may be interested in following up with her subsequently. So any particular questions?
Shane.
Shane.
Yeah, I've heard Kerryn speak before, and I'm really keen for our church to be involved. The question I have is the financial, how does it work financially? Is it a volunteer donations? Where do you get the money from?
Good question. So in terms of, so from a few places, obviously we get grants and stuff like that, or we'll apply for grants. A number of the churches have put in very generous donations to get the whole thing off the ground and to pay my salary. We're receiving a bit of money through state and government grants that we've applied for. So those are basically how we've funded it in the past. The actual cost of running it isn't that high because we have so many volunteers involved. And once we've bought the main pieces of equipment, which is the trailer and the beds, you can use it year after year.
Okay, any other questions or thoughts? Well, thank you again, Kerryn. That is quite a moving story, and it's always great to have some of the sort of case stories too of some of the individuals that you've served. Gay, I'll just hand back to Gay to make a small virtual presentation.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you, Kerryn. That was really interesting. And it's really tough times. We think we're doing it tough, but when you look at these people out there who are homeless, they're really doing it tough, especially in this particular climate. So thank you very much for coming along to our virtual meeting this morning. And we will make you a presentation, or we'll send you a certificate. What we do is we make a donation on your behalf to one of our major projects, which is Operation Cleft. And Operation Cleft does cleft palate and cleft lip operations for children in Bangladesh. So it's one of our major things. So we'll make a donation on your behalf, and Matthew will send you through a certificate saying that. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.